Shocking. GUSO fired from SmackDown after attacking the man who attacked him. WWE management just made the most tone-deaf decision in professional wrestling in 2026. And I need you to understand that phrase tone-deaf because it is not a dismissal of WWE's authority to make the decision they made. They have the authority. Nobody is questioning the authority. What is being questioned is the intelligence of using that authority in this specific direction at this specific moment against this specific person in front of this specific audience. GUSO is fired from SmackDown. The man who was ambushed. The man who was hospitalized. The man whose attack was so severe that Roman Reigns, the tribal chief himself, the most composed, most strategically managed, most carefully emotionally guarded figure in all of professional wrestling, came to his bedside because what was done to G was that serious. That man. Fired. Not the person who ambushed him. Not the person who orchestrated the attack that sent him to a hospital. Not the person whose premeditated, calculated, outside the ring, outside the match, deliberately targeted assault created the entire situation that the firing is supposedly responding to. That person is still on SmackDown, still employed, still collecting whatever arrangement their services are compensated with, still walking the same corridors, standing in the same production spaces, breathing the same air in the same building as every person who watched what they did to GUSO and has been sitting with what that means ever since. GUSO went after that person, because of course he did. Because the alternative waiting for the institution to deliver justice through official channels, through scheduled programs, through the sanitized, sanctioned, authority-approved processes that professional wrestling's governing structures maintain is the alternative that the people who designed those processes prefer. For obvious reasons. It puts them in control of the justice. It controls the timing, the scale, the visibility, and most importantly the narrative of what counts as resolution. GUSO took control of his own resolution, and WWE's response was to fire him for taking it. This is going to be one of the most important conversations this community has had in 2026. Stay in this video for all of it. Let's be careful and precise about how this decision was reached because the wrestling world's anger at the firing, which is real and is justified, should not prevent us from understanding the institutional logic that produced it. Because understanding the logic does not require accepting it, and understanding it is necessary for fully appreciating why it is wrong. Professional wrestling's on-screen authority structures operate on a principle that serves the institution's interests regardless of whether it serves the individuals within it. The principle is this: unauthorized physical conduct between roster members outside of sanctioned competitive contexts cannot be selectively enforced. The rule must apply consistently or the authority structure loses the ability to apply it at all. If you allow one person to respond to being attacked by taking unauthorized physical action against their attacker, if you permit the victim's justified response to operate outside the rule scope, you have created a precedent that every future incident will invoke. You have acknowledged that the justice of the specific situation overrides the consistency of the rule. And once that acknowledgement exists, every person with a grievance has the framework for arguing that their specific situation also justifies the exception. This is the institutional logic that produced GUSO's firing, not cruelty. Not indifference to what was done to him. The institutional logic of an authority structure protecting the function of its rules by applying them in a situation where the application is obviously unjust. Understanding that logic makes it more infuriating, not less. Because an institution that chooses the function of its rules over the justice of the specific situation they are applied to is an institution that has decided that its own operational coherence matters more than the human reality of the people its operations affect. GUSO is a human reality. What was done to him is a human reality. His response to it is a human reality. Firing him is the institution's preference for its own coherence over all of those realities simultaneously. And the wrestling world, which has been watching GUSO's human reality unfold in real time through one of the most emotionally demanding storylines of 2026, is not going to receive that preference quietly. Here is the conversation that WWE's on-screen authority structure does not want to be having right now and that this video is going to force into the open. The person who attacked GUSO is still on SmackDown. We have established this. We have established that the attack was premeditated and targeted and produced consequences severe enough to require medical attention and a hospital stay. We have established that the authority structure knew all of this when it made the decision to fire GUSO for the subsequent response. What we have not fully established and what the wrestling world needs to establish directly and without the diplomatic softening that discomforts people but protects institutions is what the firing of GUSO rather than the sanctioning of the original attacker actually protects. It protects the attacker's continued SmackDown presence. That is the direct, first-order consequence of the decision. GUSO is off SmackDown. The attacker is on SmackDown. The operational geometry of the show has been altered in a specific direction, one that removes a player the attacker had reason to fear and maintains a player who has demonstrated willingness to use unauthorized physical force on another roster member without institutional consequence. That geometry did not produce itself accidentally. The institutional decision that created it was made by specific people with specific information in a specific context that had specific beneficiaries, and tracing the decision back to its beneficiary identifying who is operationally better off as a direct result of GUSO being removed from the SmackDown roster is not a conspiracy theory, it is accountability. It is the wrestling community applying the most basic available analytical tool to the most obviously consequential decision WWE has made this week. Who benefits from GUSO being off SmackDown? Answer that question and you understand the firing, not the stated reason. The real reason. The reason that nobody in the authority structure is going to volunteer and that the wrestling world needs to arrive at through the evidence rather than through official explanation. Here is the layer of the GUSO firing story that is not receiving proportional analytical attention and that matters enormously for where the Bloodline story goes between now and WrestleMania and beyond. GUSO fired from SmackDown is GUSO removed from the operational geography of the AUG Bloodline reunion. The reunion that was one of the most emotionally significant developments of WWE's 2026, that carried the weight of everything the Bloodline's fracture period cost and the specific meaning of people who have been through real things together choosing to stand with each other again. That reunion now has a hole in it. A hole created not by any choice within the Bloodline, not by any internal political failure or loyalty test or competitive pressure that the faction could not absorb, created by an external institutional decision that removed a family member from the operational space they had returned to. That took something from Roman Reigns that the Bloodline's internal politics did not lose, something the authority structure's decision took from the outside. How Roman Reigns processes this removal is the most consequential open question in the Bloodline story right now. Because Roman's response to threats against his family, real threats, personal threats, things that penetrate the composure and the strategic management and reach the human being operating underneath the tribal chief, has been the most revealing and most important character development of his 2026. The hospital room visit established that Roman's connection to G is not simply operational, is not simply the Bloodline's personnel resource expressing concern over an injured unit member. It is personal. It is family in the specific, unconditional, protects before it strategizes way that only genuine family relationships produce. The firing of GUSO from SmackDown is an attack on that family relationship by institutional authority. And Roman Reigns, the most powerful figure in WWE's competitive landscape, the tribal chief with every operational resource of the Bloodline behind him responding to an institutional attack on his family, is something the authority structure that made the firing decision should have calculated more carefully before making it. Because institutions that attack the family of the most powerful people in their operating environment through decisions those people consider unjust tend to discover that their authority is more fragile than their rule structures suggested. Let's talk about where this places Jimmy USO. Because Jimmy USO's position in the wake of his twins firing from SmackDown is the most immediately complicated professional and personal position in WWE right now. And it is a position that has no good resolution, only a choice between equally costly directions. Jimmy USO is still employed on SmackDown. He has roster membership, contractual obligations, the specific professional commitments that keep him inside the authority structure that just fired his brother. The authority structure that applied its rules to G in a way that removed him from the show while leaving the person who created the situation firmly in place. What does Jimmy USO do with SmackDown employment in this context? Choosing to honor the employment to report for duty, to fulfill the contractual and professional obligations that SmackDown roster membership entails, is choosing to remain inside a structure that has just demonstrated its willingness to fire his twin for defending himself. It is remaining inside an institution that has shown Jimmy exactly what its priorities are and exactly how those priorities rank family against rules. Choosing to refuse to make the statement, through his own absence or through an explicit act of protest, that he does not accept the authority of an institution that fires victims for responding to the violations committed against them, is a choice with professional consequences. Real ones. Consequences that cost Jimmy the operational platform that SmackDown membership provides and that the Bloodline's positioning on the show depends on. There is no version of this choice that does not cost Jimmy something significant. There is no resolution that lets him honor both his brother's situation and his own professional obligations to an institution that has separated those two things. He has to choose which one matters more in this specific moment. And the wrestling world watching the choice being made, watching Jimmy USO decide, in real time, what twin bond and family and justice actually require from him when they come into conflict with institutional compliance, is the wrestling world watching one of the most genuinely human stories professional wrestling has told in 2026 arrive at its most human decision point. Here is the story that WWE's authority structure did not intend to create when it fired GUSO. The story that the firing produced as an unintended consequence of prioritizing institutional coherence over contextual justice. GUSO without SmackDown employment is GUSO without SmackDown constraints. He is not bound by the show's authority structure's decisions about what he can and cannot do, where he can and cannot appear, against whom and in what contexts his presence is authorized. He is free, in the specific and significant way that institutional removal makes people free, to address his situation on terms that are entirely his own rather than the institution's. And GUSO's situation: the attack, the hospital, the firing for responding, the complete failure of the authority structure to hold the actual perpetrator to account provides him with a motivation that the fired version of a person with nothing left to lose from the specific institution that fired them can act on with the specific, unmediated directness that institutional membership prevents. This freedom is what the firing accidentally created. An autonomous GUSO, operating outside SmackDown's authority structure, with every reason to return to that environment on his own terms and address what was not addressed through official channels. That return, whenever it happens, in whatever form, at whatever moment of maximum impact, is one of the most anticipated developments in SmackDown's programming right now. And the anticipation is the direct product of the firing. The authority structure's decision to remove GUSO from SmackDown is what created the audience's desire to see him return to it. The decision generated its own most compelling sequel. WrestleMania is the obvious destination, the stage where everything unresolved in a WrestleMania season arrives for its resolution. An institution-defying, fired but not finished GUSO appearing at WrestleMania to address what SmackDown's authority structure refused to address is the story that every person who felt the injustice of the firing has been constructing since the moment the firing was announced. WWE may not have intended to write that story, but the firing wrote it for them. WWE fired GUSO from SmackDown. They left the attacker employed. They chose institutional coherence over contextual justice. And the wrestling world is not letting this pass in silence. I need the loudest, most complete, most passionate responses this community has ever generated. Is the firing of GUSO the single most unjust decision WWE's on-screen authority has made in 2026, and what does the continued employment of his attacker tell you about who this decision actually serves? What does Jimmy USO do? Honor his SmackDown employment or stand with his brother in a way that costs him professionally? And the question that every single person watching this video needs to answer right now: does GUSO show up at WrestleMania? And when he does, what does the first thing he does tell you about whether justice in WWE is something that can actually be achieved? Drop every word in the comments, every feeling, every response to what was done to G and what it means that the institution responded the way it responded. Share this video immediately and with everyone you know, because the most unjust decision of WWE's 2026 deserves the loudest possible community response. Subscribe to Wrestling News CC and activate every notification. The institution fired GUSO. The institution made him free. And the most dangerous version of any person is the one who has nothing left to lose and every reason to use it. WrestleMania is coming, and GUSO will be there. Authority structure or not.